Now, trying to draw any common threads between four very different projects, two of them in one city, admittedly, but the other two in different continents, is, I think, quite difficult. But it seems to me that each of them deals to a certain extent with a tension between being a gateway or on the periphery of something and trying to become a center. I mean, that's what we were saying about the Chest Hospital, that it had moved from the center to the foothills of the mountain. The Magdeburg site is on the edge of the city, or not the traditional center, but might become its own center. You referred to a polycentric, Magdeburg becoming a polycentric city. And Justin, you talked about the gateway function of 40 Holborn Viaduct. And of course, the South Bank is a fringe site, although the number of major corporations that have had premises there is enormous, from IBM to Sainsbury to Sea Containers and others. So I wonder if you could all give some response to the idea of not just reuse, but transformation of the periphery to the center.
Well, is this working? Yeah, hi.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Holborn Viaduct is a very important part of London which is changing rapidly. Partly is the effect of the Elizabeth line comes through and changes people's perspective. And I think it's important that buildings respond to, and buildings in London continue responding to shifting magnets of influence. And I think this station is in Farringdon Street affects the people, numbers of people in the area. It affects the growth of this mid-city part of the City of London, and it affects how you address your buildings to the people coming from different directions. So this was an island site, so it had to address all directions. But I think that's those sort of changes have to be picked up on these sort of sites.
I think it's a very good question, and in our case, it being a hospital or an abandoned hospital, I think raises some very interesting ways of looking at the building, because we overlook the fact that as a hospital, the knowledge, the innovation, the research has to be something that's shared between so many people. And the number of staff, the number of people that call this, this is where they work, this is their home every day. And so it becomes an integral part of the community. And when that's sort of taken out and moved away, it's very hard to displace all those little things that went along with it, their impact in the neighborhood. So we really feel the void in that space, and it's immediately filled by, not the greatest things at first. So the fact that this proposed tenant is really perpetuating the use of medical research in the building and not turning it into something different, I think is a great accomplishment, and it's going to take advantage of the infrastructure that's there.
Well, in our case, our site was totally abandoned place, as an excellent resource place, and actually the functions that we to give, that we want to bring the energy from the city center to that place, because we are willing to attract people also from the center. So we are trying to adding many functions, requests from the inhabitants of the city, and we would like to add also further another functions of the project site. So that was more than we reuse. We want to give many activities which people can use it.
And each of these sites, in some cases single buildings, in your case in Magdeburg, obviously a collection of buildings, had some qualities. I mean, there was a power station, which becomes a city museum. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was a city museum.
Yeah, I mean, that obviously had some inherent qualities as a building. The hospital certainly had some qualities. It may have been a bit tired, but it was, by the standards of 1930s hospitals, and particularly 1960s hospitals, it was pretty good. The Holborn building, it's quite new, clearly not adequate for what it could be, but you're trying to make it into something that responds both to the historic and the contextual importance as well as the commercial importance. And Lasdun, some people think he was a great architect. I happen not to, but that I would accept there is a debate about that. But it's next to a very important public institution, the National Theatre, and a very important location for London's cultural life.
I mean, on that, I don't disagree with you about Lasdun and particularly that building. But I think what's interesting, actually, is you go back to the polycentric city. They're all all kind of reclaiming sites, giving them new addresses. Transport infrastructure and culture tend to drive these new centres. But in a sense, they are all buildings, perhaps with the exception of the one you inherited, with some quality. And I think there's an interesting thing now of the reuse of buildings that have less than significant quality, but might have good bones. And there's this thing about architecture versus the structure of the building. And actually, we're beginning to reuse buildings that are not particularly handsome in the city, but actually they are background buildings and you can make them work. I think most of what you've seen tonight are buildings of some merit, but I think this is the kind of interesting thing coming in this discussion, which is buildings of good structure but poor architecture, but we're not necessarily going to rewrap them to make them different.
Sure. And also, as I understand it, in reusing buildings, it's reusing the structure that has the real benefit because it has the most embodied energy, the most embodied carbon. It's often something like concrete or steel, which is the most expensive sort of material to resource. But I think, Simon and Justin particularly, you're making an architecture, a new sort of architecture, you from the picking up the traditions of Lasden, and Justin, you from the biophilic design, which I think both of which have got some way to go in terms of replicating on other buildings of the type you're referring to, Simon.
I mean, I would say that Lasden's building had more inherent usefulness and quality in its frame, and in your case, you're reinventing the appearance of the building and the amenity of the building. It's a different kind of take because we are doing little but exploiting what is there, whereas you're retaining essential structure and then representing it and adding amenities. You're not just refacading, you're justifying the making of a new facade by making a whole new external world for the amenity.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, the existing structure, which is very close to the boundary of our building, has been a hindrance as much as an opportunity. We've, on the south elevation, Holborn Viaduct, where the facade is right up to the boundary, we've had to cut back. And that's difficult because the internal structure now becomes external, and all of that sort of weathering and thermal nightmare of hoops you have to jump through to create a continuous biodiversity sort of facade on that location. It's very complicated, but that building, I mean, it does have some merits. It's incredibly efficient. 2004, you wanted 1 to 6, you wanted incredibly efficient floor plates, everybody sat down in rows. It works incredibly efficiently. It doesn't work for people. And so what we've tried to do is to create something which works for people, but you have to use the bones you've got, and the carbon story is so critical.
Yeah. And Azab, what you're doing, as much as anything, is reviving the ethos of the hospital in the sense of being a centre for research and treatment for chest diseases. And that is continuing and expanding, which I think is quite an interesting point as well.
Very much so. I think what was interesting was the main tenant, the president chairman of that company, Salcarda, said, we really have to make this a space where this talented staff that's extremely difficult to bring to a place are literally exploring cities all around the world, and they have to feel like they're going to be able to do their best work in this place. So there are many things that are going into making that type of environment for them and making them feel welcome, challenged, and well surrounded. So I think that larger outlook on behalf of the prime tenant sort of carried its way through the rest of the campus eventually.
Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time. We could obviously continue, but I think we've seen 4 very interesting examples of reusing buildings and indeed reusing uses. And can we thank the panelists?